Hi there, Newmar owners. Today in your 2013 Newmar Bay Star, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install Roadmaster's front sway bar. And this is what our sway bar looks like when it's installed. This is going to be a direct replacement sway bar. And you do get not just a sway bar, but also new end links and all the hardware to install it. So end links are actually a pretty common fail point along with bushings on sway bars. So if you've got a motorhome out there that's making a little clunk noise, seems like it sways a little more than it used to, and you get down here and inspect it, that's a perfect time to do an upgrade to one of these here, because that way you're fixing your problem and also making it better at the same time. Because our Roadmaster bar is going to be a larger, thicker diameter bar than what your previous factory sway bar is. It is a little bit heavier, so keep that in mind when installing it, but we get a lot more anti-sway properties with this bar versus our old one because of that extra mass, and it's just more rigid in its design as far as its shape as well. Now we can see here how our sway bar kind of works. The bushings towards the center here attach it to our axle, which is always going to be planted on the road so we can maintain control. And then our motorhome sitting on top of our suspension, on top of the axle, and that's where our end links, they go up and they connect to the frame where it's sitting up on top of our suspension there. So as we're going down the road, if we get a big heavy crosswind or we turn the wheel real hard to the right or to the left to make an evasive maneuver, our motorhome's going to want to sway. Now our wheels are always going to be planted on the road, but our motorhome can pivot on its suspension to help absorb some of the impacts of the road and stuff and allow you to have a somewhat comfortable ride. But with these motorhomes, there's so much weight there that you do get pretty excessive sway with them. Well, what happens when you have sway occur? Our anti-sway bar here, the way that it helps to prevent that is with the way the bar is attached to the axle and the frame. So we get those two pieces. Our arms stick out like this on our sway bar. So we'll just say, for example, we had a heavy crosswind blowing this direction. So it blows us towards the passenger side. Our motorhome's starting to lean that way. Well, our axle's going to stay planted to the road, but the top of our motorhome's going to tilt like this. You can see that when it does that tilt, this side here, the frame is now closer to the axle, and on the opposite side, it is further away from the axle. So if the frame is closer to the axle, that means that this end link here had to be pushing down. So it's twisting our sway bar down on this side and it's pulling up on that side when we're swaying to the right. Our bar doesn't want to twist. I mean, it's designed to be able to do that, but it wants to stay in this normal resting position. So it's going to spring itself back, help pulling our motorhome back upright, just helping to prevent sway overall because it has to twist that bar even to sway some. Now you are of course still going to get sway. This is a massive motorhome, but this is definitely going to reduce it from where you were at before. In addition to a sway bar here in the front, I would also recommend a replacement sway bar at the back. Now it's not a replacement, I said it's a replacement there, it's actually an additional sway bar from Roadmaster for your rear. So you'll keep your factory one and the rear one will install behind the axle, giving you even further anti-sway benefits. All these things add together to just help to prevent sway as much as possible. As a driver, you're always going to be the one that's going to have to maintain control. So whenever you get that sway, you're having to compensate for it. And that can become tiresome on long trips. So by adding these components, it helps to reduce that, to restore some energy so you're not so fatigued. To further increase the ride quality of your motorhome and make it easier for you to handle, I would also recommend a set of sumo springs. You can get those for both the front and rear axle. Those act as like a dampener. They go kind of where your jounce bumper would go, and they'll help to cushion any impacts on the road so you hit potholes and things like that. It's not going to be so jarring. And they also do help to prevent sway because the same thing as the motorhome, once it tilts, it squishes that sumo, pushes back up. Lastly, I'd also recommend a steering stabilizer, which installs on our drag link here. Now our customer already has one installed. We can see that here. This is not one from Roadmaster. This might be a factory one. So a lot of motorhomes don't actually have any type of steering stabilizer on them, but they help out a lot because if you're hitting an impact on the road, those sumo springs, they pick up a little bit, but the wheel usually still jerks. And that's where our dampening absorber, or the one from Roadmaster, would come into play, is it would help to minimize how much of that you would feel on the inside and the wheel wouldn't jerk as much. This one doesn't have it, that the customer has installed, but the Roadmaster one also has a large spring mechanism. And that spring mechanism is designed to be at its neutral position when the wheels are going straight. So if it does pull the steering wheel to the left or to the right when you hit that pothole, that spring's going to pull it back so you're not the only one having to do all the work. And all those things, they do really add up to a huge difference in your confidence of the handling abilities of your motorhome. We'll begin our installation underneath your motorhome. You will want to work on this just where it's on the ground. We do have a lift here. Our lift supports it by the wheel, so it is as if it's sitting on the ground. So we'll crawl under here and we're gonna get our old sway bar removed so we can get the new one installed. So we'll go ahead and start here on the end links. We'll get this hardware loose. So you'll have one of these on each side. Get your bolt here at the bottom where it's attaching and also at the top. We're gonna start with the top, focus up there. So we're going to use an 18 and a 15 millimeter wrench to loosen up the hardware here. So for these upper bolts, the outer, the bolt here is going to be the 15 and there's a nut on the inside, that's your 18. We have a single bolt that goes through the end link right here, but you see there's this bracket on the outside. There's another bolt here on top. We're going to be fully removing this bolt to get the end link off, but the bolt here on top, we just need to loosen it a little bit because the bracket is clamping the end link to the frame a little bit. So we just need to loosen it so it's not clamped in there. So we'll take our 15 here and start to get our hardwire off. You'll need to feed your wrench up in here and get on the 18 millimeter that is located up in there. And then we can start removing the bolt. And it is going to be pretty tight in here. So just kind of work at it. It is going to be real tight. Unfortunately, you're not going to be able to fit too many other tools up into this location. After you get the nut off this bolt, we can go ahead and loosen the top one. I am going to thread this one in just a little bit here at my wrench. The nut is right here. We did get it all the way off. I'm just kind of threading it back in some because we're going to use this bolt just as a little bit of a support for a while as we're pulling the bar off there so it can't fall off. So it's nice to just have it in just a little bit so that way our bar can't fall off as we're taking all this hardware out. So now we're going to go up to the top one, and that one we're going to loosen next. And again, this one we don't need to take all the way off. We just need to loosen it a little bit. Next, we're going to remove the bolts here from the lower section. So we're going to use an 18 millimeter socket for the nut here, and then our 15 millimeter wrench will hold the bolt. So go ahead and slide that on there and zip this off. Now, after we zip that off of there like that, again, just like that top bolt that we threaded back in a little bit, we're just going to put this nut on here just like that. And again, it's going to help hold things together so that way nothing can fall down. Also, after I threaded this bolt in, we're going to take that nut and just do the same thing, just a couple of turns on this upper one so that way it can't fall. We'll now repeat all the stuff we did over here on this side, on the other side over here. Once you take care of both of your end links on each side, we're going to turn our attention now to the shackles in our bushings here, where our bushing clamps are. So these bushing clamps have a bolt on each side we'll need to take off. The bolt head is a 15 millimeter, so we'll put that in our gun, and then we'll use an 18 millimeter wrench to hold the nut on the back side here. So we'll zip this out of here. And now, just like we did with our other hardware that we removed, after we get this loose, I'm going to push it back in, and I'm going to put just a couple of turns on the nut there. That way, again, it's holding that bar up while we're taking everything loose. We'll now do the bottom one the same way. And again, after we get this one off, we're going to just thread it on there a turn, and then we'll head over to the other side and get those set up like this as well. Now at this point, all the hardware is loose. This bar is pretty much ready to come out of here. Now the instructions tell you to take the links off and then the bushing clamps. You can do it whichever way you like. I personally find it a little easier if we start with the clamps first and then do the end links, because that way we can kind of just let the weight swing down, because the majority of the mass here is this bar. And if you're working on the ground, that way this bar basically just set it on the ground. I'm gonna put it in my lap because we're here in a chair working on the lift. But yeah, I find it easier to do it this way. So What we're gonna do is go back to our bolts here that we had loosened up on our shackles. I'm taking the nuts off that we had loosely installed on there. All right, now that we got that last nut removed, we're just gonna pull outward. Your bolts might fall on the ground, but it's kind of the safest way to do it, because that way you can just kind of set it right down onto the ground. We're just kind of letting it hang there. So now we're gonna take the bar off next, and we're gonna remove it from the bottom of the end link here. This should be the easiest point to do it. So we can pull the nut off there. We're gonna go ahead and pull the nut off this side. And again, support on your sway bar whenever you're doing this. So now we can just lift up a little bit on this one side, pull that bolt out. We'll then lift up a little bit on the other side, pull that bolt out, and then we'll just bring this bar out and set it aside. Now that we've got the big heavy mass out of the way, it's a lot easier to get these end links off. We're just reaching up there and unthreading that nut that we just put on for like a little safety component. After you pull that off, you will have to pull the bolt out all the way because it's in that bracket, and then slide it on down. You don't need to save any of your hardware. We do get new hardware and new end links. So all this stuff, we're just gonna set it aside, get the other side off the same way. All right, now we're gonna start getting our new components installed. We're gonna start with our end links here. The end link, you can see, has a bend in it at about that point. And where the bend is, you're gonna have a shorter section and a longer section. We want the longer section to be towards the top, and we want it to bend towards the outside of the vehicle. The head here is bent just a little bit too, so when it sits flush, it actually kind of bends inward a little bit and then almost straight down when it's sitting in there. So this is the orientation it needs to go in when installing it. You'll use the bolt that comes in your kit, the longer ones. So this is gonna slide through our bracket up here. So our bracket right here, our end link will push up in between the frame and the bracket, just like our old end link was, and then our bolts will go through. Now you may have an AC compressor here. You can see that it's obstructing us getting that bolt in there. The instructions recommend that you put the bolts from the inside out. I actually find that to be a little bit more difficult. So what you can do is just take this bracket. We've got the upper piece loose so it swivels. Just take the bracket, it swivels upward, swivel it up, push your bolt through it, and then just swivel it back down, and then your bolt will slide through. After you get your bolt slid through, our nut is going to go on the inside, thread it on there. It is a nylon locking nut, so you're not going to be able to thread it on that far by hand. All right, once you get it to where it stops though, we can then go ahead and snug this down some. Now we're not going to snug it all the way down because see how it's pivoting here? We still want a little bit of pivot to it to make things easier lining up, but we're going to just snug it down to take out most of the play, but make sure it still has a little bit of movement like this. We'll use a 3/4 inch wrench, and you can potentially get a socket in there, which it's so tight you're probably just going to need 2 wrenches. And if you have a ratcheting wrench, I highly recommend that for snugging this down. So that way you can put your wrench up in there to hold the nut and use your ratcheting wrench to tighten the bolt. After you get this one on snug down, you can see I took out most of the play, but it can still pivot. We're going to do the same thing over on the other side to get this one installed up here. We'll finalize tightening down those hardware for the upper half at a later step. At this point now, we're going to head over to our bar because we got some preparation we need to do on that. To prepare our bar for installation, we're going to get the bushings installed. So here you can see our bushing. It is a split bushing. It is cut there, so that way we can open it up to slide it on our bar over there. This is the lubricant that comes in your kit that we'll need to place on the interior of the bushing. We're going to fully coat the inside. Now, some customers have reported that they get irritation on their skin from the grease here, so you do want to take your own precautions, maybe wear gloves. I've never noticed it myself, but everybody's body's a little bit different, and you know that better than anybody else would. So just take those precautions. So we're just going to grab a generous amount of this here, and we're going to fully coat the interior of our bushing here. So just smear it all the way around. Once you've taken care of this half of the interior, we'll flip it over, make sure we get it all the way across on the other half. Now, after you've got the inside fully greased up, we don't want a lot of grease on the outside of the bushing, but I like to take just a little bit that's on my finger there and just put a little bit on there. This can just help minimize any squeaks or rattles. So once you've got it all prepared, we can go over to our bar here. Go ahead and just split it to open it up, and that'll just snap around it. You can then put your cap on it if you want. These caps are kind of known to want to slide off of there when you're working on them, so if you wanted to hold off on putting that on at a later step, you could. We're going to prepare our other bushing the same way on the other end of the bar. So we're now going to be putting our bar in there. One of the things we want is our Roadmaster sticker here. Make sure that you can read the Roadmaster sticker. We want it to be in that orientation. So I just got it propped up on me here. You could slide it under your motorhome. We're going to put it up pretty much in kind of sort of reverse on how we did it. We're going to go with the end links first. I again prefer to put it on the links because in most cases when you're working on the ground, you can almost just leave the weight on the ground and just tip it up, and you're going to be pretty close to your end link there. So I'm going to let it just hang down for just 1 second, talk about the hardware. These are the bolts we're going to use down below. They're the same as the ones up top, but we have washers that we need to use down here. So we're going to go ahead and take the nut off and slide our washers off of there. Our washers need to go on each side of our end link. Now before we lift it up and attach it to our end links, we're going to prepare our bolt. So take your bolt, slide a washer on it like that. This is the same hardware that we use up top. We're just adding washers to it now. We're getting ready to lift it up, and when we do, our bolt is going to go through the end link and then through the sway bar. So you can even have it kind of prepared there like that, and you could even potentially prepare the other side and set it in there like that as well, so that way you've got your bolts ready. So now I'm going to go ahead and lift this up. We'll push this through our components, and we're going to follow it up with a washer and a nut on the other side. So we'll just swing it up, and again, if you're doing this on the ground, there is a good chance that when you lift it up, it's almost going to be at the right height to slide onto your end link. There we go. We'll slide that in there just like that. Washer, nut, and then we'll do the other side next. We're going to swing our bar up, and our bushing clamps here should line up with the factory holes, and we're just going to attach it back there. We are going to use new hardware that comes in our kit, so these are the shorter bolts. Go ahead and place a washer onto the shorter bolt. I did also take the other washer that we're going to place on the other side and nuts and just sat them on the axle there. That way they're close by, so when I go to lift this up here, I can reach my hardware. There's going to be 2 per side, so I got double the hardware set up here, so I can do this one side, then I'll grab my other hardware for the other side. So now we're going to swing it up. This way the end links are kind of help holding some of the weight for you. You might have to spin your bushings to get those to properly line up. After we slide our bolt through with the washer on it, we're then going to take another washer, place that on the back side, and then place a nut on it. After we get that one started there, we're going to finish up this side. Push that through. Washer, and then nut. And then once you got this far, the bar should hold itself up there. You don't want to push this bolt all the way in either, because there's a vertical bolt here that actually kind of obstructs putting the nut on. So just slide it through far enough to get the nut started, and that's good enough. And then we're just going to head over to the other side now and get that hardware started in there. When we went to put in the other side, corrosion actually took its course here, and the hole is closed up just a little bit. I can't get the hardware to slide in. And that's not uncommon if it's an older motorhome. But we're going to use a 1/2-inch bit. All the hardware that comes in your kit here is 1/2 inch. And you can just drill straight on through there to clean that up. And it might be easier to go from the back side sometimes. Just kind of depends on the best angle that you need to get to it. After cleaning up those holes, our hardware slides in easily, and we can get it all started. Once you've got all the hardware loosely started like this, we're pretty close to ready to tighten it down. The only thing we got left here is just double check your bar and position it in the center. Just kind of check on each side, make sure you've got roughly the same amount sticking out. If you need to adjust it left or right, you should do so now. It looks like we got it pretty well centered there, so I think we're good to go, and go ahead and snug down our hardware. All the hardware that Comes in your kit that we installed here is going to be a 3/4 inch size. So you'll use either 3/4 inch socket or wrench. Don't forget though, with your upper end link here, you had that bracket, so you still got to tighten down that factory bolt and nut up top, and that was a 15 and an 18 up there. So yeah, we're going to go through and snug them all down now. Once we have all of our hardware tightened down, at this point you can now take your motor home for a test drive. Just be listening for any clunks or noises. If you hear a clunk, especially if it's something you didn't have before, make sure you go back in here and double check all your fasteners for proper tightness. And that completes our installation of Roadmaster's front sway bar on our 2013 Newmar Bay Star.